Hello and welcome back. Today I'm going to be talking about rest for teachers and how we can use lessons from the past to reset and renew. So many years ago, I read the logbooks of Victorian village schools in the rural districts of Bedfordshire, which is about 50 miles north of London. These logbooks had been written during the first few years of compulsory schooling in that area. And so what I would do is I'd call up the school, ask them if they had a Victorian logbook, and after explaining my interest in rhythm-based teaching and learning, they would then really kindly invite me to drop in and search for hidden treasure to help my research project. These logbooks belonged to the archive of each of the schools and contained handwritten daily records of the work of the school teacher. They were written out in meticulous copperplate script. So I travelled from school to school and I scoured these logbooks looking for references to rhythm-based learning such as drill or singing or reciting poetry or reciting times tables. I must say my efforts were largely unrewarded. But instead, I found a different kind of rhythm. The seasonal rhythms of spring, summer, autumn, and winter were the times that frustrated the despairing school teachers the most. The school would be absolutely empty if the children were needed for tasks on the land, such as picking fruit, harvesting crops, and taking part in 3-day-long festivals that would celebrate the named day of every saint imaginable. These were the traditions that had tied the local community to the land for hundreds and hundreds of years. So the community was involved in traditional singing and dancing and celebration at these times. The teacher in each school, it seemed, was left absolutely helpless and unable to persuade the families to send their children to school during these times. Attendance was very low for these reasons, and each teacher would pour her anguish onto the pages of the logbook. The poor school teacher was working alone. So in school after school, I read entries where the teacher shared her dread of facing the school inspector and receiving the school inspector's criticism of her. She knew that the news would be bad, very bad, in fact. In every school, I read the logbook entries that told the same story. The teacher was blamed for low attendance and received no support whatsoever. 100 years later, Arlie Hochschild dissected the role of emotion in the workplace in her incredible book, The Managed Heart: Commercialization of Human Feeling. This book is about working for airlines, but the message can be applied more broadly. In the book, Hochschild identified and illuminated a particular aspect of people-facing work, which she coined shadow labour. What is shadow labour, you might ask? It's the unseen and unacknowledged effort which is not in the contract but is still an essential aspect of getting the job done. I think we have all been in a situation where we discover that what is being asked of us goes beyond the remit. I speak to teachers, for example, who are always saying, teachers are being asked to do so much more now. The role has changed a lot. So, for example, if you find yourself doing something that is completely new, such as toileting a child rather than teaching them phonics, you might wonder to what extent you're being asked to give a more personal service. Hochschild asked the question, what is my work role and what is me? In my opinion, this question speaks to the repositioning of the blurry line between professional and personal services. It's striking that the context of Hochschild's emotional labour also speaks to a power dynamic. This power relationship amplified the status of the person in power and diminished the status of the subordinate. The Victorian school logbooks illustrated this beautifully. We know from neuroscience that repetition in the context of emotional intensity will build stronger neural wiring. I saw the same entries of fear and anguish repeated week after week in all the logbooks that I read. I'm in no doubt that the school teachers suffered from the effects of scrutiny, not only from the inspectors and the school board, but also felt the disrespect from the parents and the children. Research into power dynamics of monkeys showed higher status monkeys are calm and have higher impulse control. And these behaviours are associated with their higher levels of serotonin. Lower status monkeys have lower serotonin levels and are more reactive. The higher status monkeys maintain their status by looking the lower status monkeys in the eye. As soon as researchers blocked the monkey's eye contact, the dominance and serotonin levels of the high status monkeys started to drop. Low-ranking monkeys rose to prominence when they were given serotonin supplements. And when the researchers manipulated the status of these monkeys, their serotonin levels spontaneously adjusted to reflect their new position in monkey society. It seems that neurochemistry can be dialed up and dialed down through a few simple steps. Hochschild investigated this and drilled into the underlying mechanics of power dynamics and emotional labour by drawing on the work of Stanislavski, the founder of method acting. He distinguished between the immediate effect of surface acting versus the powerful impact of deep acting, also known as method acting. Hochschild said, "We are capable of disguising what we feel, of pretending to feel what we do not, and of doing the surface acting." She also said, "Deep acting involves deceiving oneself as much as deceiving others. In surface acting, we may deceive others about what we really feel, but we do not deceive ourselves." If the emotional labour involves a certain amount of tolerance, for example, of toileting a particular child day after day, and the natural way to manage this is by pretending that you don't mind, then that would amount to surface acting. But if one person takes on the toileting role for a whole group of children day after day, the repetition and the intense emotions of perhaps resentment or frustration, or even the suppression of anger, could eventually give way to a deeper form of acting, one in which the self gives way to the pressure of the situation. Each Victorian school teacher was isolated and pushing hard against the tide of local farming traditions and the rural calendar of festivals and religious celebrations that had been in place for many generations. But it was obvious that these teachers were dedicated, they really cared, and they wanted every child to learn to read and write and excel in arithmetics and sewing. The inspectors of the day would not hesitate to sack a teacher and install a new one. I remember holding my breath as I turned the page in one logbook, and then, brimming with tears, I read on. The teacher noted so beautifully that her term of employment had been terminated. So now, here we are at the end of term, in fact, at the end of the school year. And I can't help thinking that keeping going and finishing strong are such admirable qualities. They build character as well as professionalism. At the same time, I also think of Hochschild's insight into emotional labour and how it shines a light on the shadowy qualities of the power dynamics that can become stressful in education, especially as the system adapts to the new context post-pandemic. I wonder how many times have you, as a teacher, needed to put on a cheerful mask just to keep going, especially in the last few weeks? If this resonates, please understand the profound importance of resting deeply from so much sustained emotional effort. Remember how incredible you are, no matter what has been asked of you this year. Big thank you from me. Take care, and I hope to see you next time.